Senator Reynolds.
Thank you very much, Mr Acting Deputy President. I too rise today to speak on the Migration Amendment Protection and Other Measures Bill 2014, a bill that is vital to the continued success of legislation passed in this place last year to secure our borders and to speed up processing of genuine asylum seekers' claims. Mr Acting Deputy President, I'd like to state up front that I believe it is in our national interest that we are able to determine the identity of those seeking asylum in Australia. I believe it is simply the right thing to do. This bill clarifies and codifies the responsibilities on asylum seekers to assist authorities in proving who they are and where they come from. Hardly an unreasonable expectation of somebody seeking asylum in this country. I've previously spoken on the Migration and Maritime Powers Legislation Amendment Bill last year, which was passed by the Senate on a final sitting day last year, with the support of the Palmer United Party, Senators Day, Lyon-Helm, Muir and Xenophon. Already in this short time, as a result of that legislation, we are making significant improvements for our border protection agencies. And also we are providing greater support to those who arrived illegally by boat. That bill last year reaffirmed the Coalition's strong stance on border protection in a way that I believe is both timely and therefore humane, which sadly are two characteristics that were not readily evident in the past government's border protection policies. Mr Acting Deputy President, Senator Milne's language in her speech just then, with Australia going rogue and torturing people, I mean really, how utterly offensive to all Australians, to the Australian government and to the men and women of our border protection and other relevant agencies.
Order. Senator Reynolds, please resume your seat. Senator Milne, did you have a point of order?
Yes, I did. I just wanted to point out that the Special Rapporteur, Juan Mendez,
Milne, this is a debating point. It's not a point of order. It's a debating point. You've had your opportunity to speak. Senator Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy President. And I would also note that I understand that when that report was made, no information or verification was done of those particular claims, so hardly a very credible report, I would suggest. But I would again ask those opposite, and particularly those in the Greens, coming in and using such awful language and making such terrible suggestions about our border protection agencies. I just wonder where were they when 1,200 people or more died the most heinous deaths and 8,000 children went through detention. Where were they then? Where were they worried about human rights?
Order. Senator Hanson-Young. Please continue, Senator Reynolds. Order. Order. It's clear to me that Senator Reynolds wants to continue without disorderly interjection, so I'd ask both Senator Di Natale and Senator Hanson-Young to cease being disorderly.
Well, if they'd like me to answer the question, I'll tell you where they were. They were actually supporting the Labor Party and their policies that implemented this, and they supported the Labor government. So I think that's where they were. And by Senator Hanson-Young equating this government and the people who serve in this government with Nazi Germany, and by using some of the most heinous crimes against women, rape, genital mutilation and other such torture, to try and suggest that this government and the men and women who serve this government are torturing and would support the torture of these women is utterly offensive. Both Senator Hanson-Young and Senator Milne have also in their speeches made a series of extremely vague and unsubstantiated allegations that this legislation breaches international legal obligations, including non-refoulement. But, as always, there was not one specific shred of evidence of what convention it breached, what section or what precedent it might breach. Again, nothing from those on the other side except overblown hyperbole and rhetoric, I should say. So last year's legislation reintroduced temporary protection visas, and they are now a critical component of the government's key objective to process the current backlog of illegal maritime arrivals. This, to me, is a humane outcome. Under the previous government that they supported, it could have taken up to 7 years to process under their legislation people. That is not a humane outcome. Now, the legislation also included the introduction of the fast-track system, amongst other measures, to achieve this. As a result of that legislation, pleasingly and wonderfully, the number of children in detention has now fallen from a high of nearly 2,000 under the previous government to today, I understand, it's less than 120, and action is now being taken to get the remaining out of detention. So this bill today before the Senate is another crucial step in ensuring a safe and secure Australia, and is one of a raft of measures to resolve the immigration status of the illegal maritime arrival legacy caseload. A disgraceful 30,000 people arrived under the previous Labor government with the support of the Greens. 30,000 people were waiting up to 7 years to have their claims processed. That is not humane, Mr Acting Deputy Speaker.
Order. Senator Hanson-Young.
This bill is also crucial for the legislative measures passed by Parliament last year to—
Order. Resume your seat, Senator Reynolds. Senator Hanson-Young, you're being disorderly. I'd ask you to please cease interjecting so that Senator Reynolds can conclude her statement to the Senate. Order. Senator Hanson-Young. Senator Reynolds.
Well, Senator Hanson-Young would like some facts, Mr Acting Deputy President. I'd love to provide them. 1,200 people died under the policies of those opposite, 8,000 children were in detention, and 30,000 people were waiting up to 7 years to have their claims processed by the government that the Greens supported. Those are the facts, Mr Acting Deputy President, as inconvenient as they are for the Greens and those opposite. So, the amendments under this bill—
Senator Hanson-Young, you've had a contribution already to this debate. We don't need you chiming in on others. Senator Reynolds, thank you. Order. Order.
I listened to both of you.
Senator Hanson-Young, you are being disorderly. Senator Reynolds.
Thank you. The amendments in this bill seek to clarify the responsibilities on asylum seekers so that this identification can occur as soon as possible after arrival. The amendments codify the existing responsibilities of asylum seekers in relation to protection claims in the Migration Act. The bill clarifies that any person's claim for a protection visa must be comprehensive and supported to the best of the asylum seeker's ability, hardly unreasonable in the circumstances. I'd like to reiterate that these responsibilities exist currently, and that the proposed amendments make no changes to the requirements placed on asylum seekers. What, however, the amendments seek to do is clarify these responsibilities in the legislation. Further, these responsibilities are consistent with an acknowledged and long-standing principle of international refugee law that the burden of proof lies on the person submitting a claim. That is the current burden of proof in international refugee law, although you wouldn't believe it listening to those opposite. This principle is an important one.
Continue, Senator Reynolds.
This principle is an important one. In making a claim, an asylum seeker must provide supporting evidence to the best of their ability to allow our border protection officials to decide whether there is an obligation to provide protection. Again, on behalf of the Australian people, not an unreasonable requirement. But without the assistance of the asylum seeker who is making the claim, our jobs for border protection and immigration officials becomes extremely difficult if they cannot prove who these people are. Whilst officials can continue to ask questions and seek clarification on information given by the applicants, early and full presentation of claims allows refugees to be recognised much earlier, which again is the more humane outcome, rather than waiting them wait years and years. Further, the amendments will allow our border protection officers to process asylum seekers in an efficient manner, which would see those who need asylum granting protection at the earliest possible opportunity, and not under those have to wait up to 7 years currently. The importance of presenting a full claim for protection at the earliest opportunity is, as I've said, essential both for the claimant and also for the government. Currently, non-genuine asylum seekers can and do exploit the application process by presenting new claims or evidence at the review stage. This deliberately causes significant delays in the processing of their claims and the claims of others also seeking asylum. This bill enables the Refugee Review Tribunal to draw unfavourable inference about the credibility of claims or evidence that are not raised at the earliest possible opportunity. Again, a very fair and reasonable requirement. This will discourage the late presentation of evidence and ensure that applicants are able to be processed in a timely manner. If people can provide the evidence, they should provide it at the earliest possible opportunity. However, this bill includes safeguards to ensure that applicants with a genuine need for protection are dealt with appropriately. If new claims and evidence are accompanied by a reasonable explanation as to why this information has been provided later, the Tribunal will still address all of the claims and evidence on their merits. So these amendments strike a totally appropriate balance between deterring abuse of the system, which clearly is occurring currently, and still addressing and ensuring procedural fairness for those who are in genuine need of assistance and asylum. Mr Acting Deputy President, we are all too aware that many asylum seekers, on the advice of people smugglers, destroy their identity documents before they arrive in Australia, assuming that they will just be given the benefit of the doubt. And I know from my personal experience in this policy area that people smugglers do recommend to asylum seekers that they give up their identity documents before they are permitted to board boats in Australia. We know this, we know it is true, and we know it as being a long-standing practice. These are identity documents that have previously been used by the same asylum seekers to travel to Indonesia, sometimes on 1, 2 or maybe 3 aircrafts through customs and borders in a number of countries before they get to Indonesia. We know for many of them that these identity documents did exist and have existed, but that they are destroyed to give them a better possible chance and to exploit our goodwill and our current systems. Mr Acting Deputy President, an identity document, if you are a genuine refugee, should be the most important document that you hold and retain throughout your journey to Australia, because it will also assist to prove your case. The destruction of these documents, quite rightly, raises concerns about the validity of asylum seekers' claims, as does the use of forged documents, which is also an occurrence, something that occurs. Mr Acting Deputy President, establishing a person's identity, nationality or citizenship is central to determining protection visa eligibility. People smugglers do not screen their customers on the basis of whether they are a genuine refugee or not. This point is irrelevant to them. As long as they've got the cash, they'll take them. They'll take anybody's money who's got the 10,000 odd, although I understand it's a bit cheaper lately due to our border protection policies, but the $10,000 US or more that they'll pay them, they do not screen them for the genuineness of their claims. So we cannot rely on the simple fact that just because a person has paid a people smuggler, flown through a number of countries, ended up in Indonesia, with or without documentation, that they are in fact a genuine refugee. The simple fact that they've put themselves on this boat is not sufficient for us to say, yes, they are a genuine refugee. We have to be able to establish their identity. It is therefore vital that the use of bogus identity documents and the destruction and discarding of documentary evidence is discouraged and not rewarded. The measures proposed in this bill are critical in that respect. And despite what Senator Milne has just told us, this amendment is not going rogue or Australia going alone or some evidence of international exceptionalism in this case, because it is in fact in line with legislation already in the United States, in the United Kingdom and in New Zealand. So this is hardly going rogue or hardly against our international obligations or an example of exceptionalism. So, Mr Acting Deputy President, I'd also like to address some of the claims of those opposite that there are no safeguards. The safeguards to ensure an asylum seeker is afforded procedural fairness remains unchanged. I'll say that again. The safeguards to ensure an asylum seeker is afforded procedural fairness remains unchanged. The codes of procedure within the Migration Act will ensure these new measures are used appropriately, and all protection visa applications will continue to be assessed in good faith. The primary purpose of these amendments is not for visa refusal, but to ensure that asylum seekers are aware of the importance of providing genuine documentation as soon as they can. And to rebut what has also been suggested by the Green speakers, where an applicant has a reasonable explanation for failing to produce original documents and has taken all reasonable steps to do so, these amendments will not be revoked. Additionally, Mr Acting Deputy President, these amendments represent a fair and balanced approach to handling claims in the absence of documentation provided by the applicant. I believe it is absolutely imperative that our border protection officials are able to determine the identity of those seeking asylum in Australia, and these amendments are critical to ensuring that they can. I'm also aware that the opposition has indicated that they support all parts of this bill other than Schedule 2, which concerns the more likely than not threshold for complementary protection. Complementary protection is a term that describes a possible visa pathway for a category of people who, whilst not meeting the Refugee Convention definition, are nonetheless in need of protection on the basis that they face serious violations of their human rights if sent back to their receiving country. For this class of people, the bill seeks to restore the originally intended more likely than not threshold, which I think is a very good thing and a fair thing. This threshold is an acceptable position open to Australia under international law and is consistent with the thresholds adopted in both the United States and Canada, despite the assertions of the Greens that this somehow represents Australia going rogue. In fact, it is not. Despite what they would have us believe, this test does not require decision-makers to precisely determine whether there is a 48, 49 or 47% chance of an asylum seeker being subject to torture. It is not a quantifiable greater than 50% chance style test, and that is very clear. That point is simply not true. Civil courts in this country make judgments every day based on a balance of probability standard. The more likely than not test is the same threshold. It is a fair and reasonable standard to use in the case of complementary protection. Mr Acting Deputy President, it is interesting to note that this threshold is the same threshold that was initially adopted by the Labor government when the complementary protection legislation commenced in the Migration Act in March 2012. I'll say that again. This is exactly the same threshold test that was introduced by Labor in 2012. And now, par for course, Labor is now rejecting the very threshold that they themselves adopted. This bill's intention is not to raise the threshold, but merely to return it to the level that was set by Labor. Once again, those opposite are seeking to derail the government's pledge to take control of our borders and restore faith in Australia's immigration measures. If Labor and the Greens vote with the government today, we could ensure that thousands of illegal maritime arrivals have their asylum applications dealt with in the most efficient and
Order.
illegal maritime arrivals. Illegal maritime arrivals, Mr Acting Deputy President. That is the Mr Acting Deputy President, illegal maritime arrivals, IMAs, illegal maritime arrivals.
Order.
Thank you.
Senator Reynolds.
Illegal maritime arrivals. Mr Acting Deputy President, I think it's pretty clear. Illegal maritime arrivals. So, despite the fact—
Senator Reynolds, Senator Cormann on point of order.
Acting Deputy President, as you know, interjections are highly disorderly. The Greens haven't stopped interjecting, and I would ask you to call the Greens to order.
There is no point of order, but I do remind senators in the chamber that everyone is entitled to be heard in silence. Senator Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy President. This bill sends a clear message to people smugglers and asylum seekers alike of the importance of identity documents and the benefits of presenting a full claim as early as possible. This government is not in the business of denying protection visas to those who genuinely meet the criteria, but we will not allow those who board a boat without a genuine claim to do so. We must be able to determine who is genuine and who is not. It is simply in our national interest to do so. But also, Mr Acting Deputy President, we must also be able to determine who is a potential risk to our community. While these cases are rare, there are documented cases of asylum seekers who have gone on to commit heinous crimes in our community. We do have a duty of care to all Australians. This bill will provide clarity to asylum seekers and give our border protection officials the tools necessary to protest claims efficiently and fairly. It is for these reasons that I will be supporting the bill, and I commend it to the Senate.
Senator